Let's get right into it. Number 7. Sticky notes. Some guy at 3M was trying to make the world's strongest adhesive in 1968 and instead created what might be the world's weakest one. Spencer Silver ended up with this pathetic glue that barely held anything together. It was like trying to tape your life back together with hopes and dreams. For 6 years, this failure sat around the lab like that friend who crashes on your couch and never leaves. Then in 1974, his colleague Art Fry had an epiphany during church choir practice. His bookmarks kept falling out of his hymnal, and suddenly this useless adhesive didn't seem so useless anymore. He slapped Silver's weak sauce glue onto little pieces of paper, and boom, Post-it notes were born. Your brain probably can't even imagine a world without these little yellow squares of procrastination. They've become the physical manifestation of your inability to remember literally anything. Need to remember to buy milk. Slap a sticky note on your forehead. Trying to organize your life? Sticky note constellation on your monitor. Want to passive-aggressively communicate with your roommate? Nothing says wash your dishes like a fluorescent pink square of judgment stuck to their laptop. The beautiful irony? 3M was desperately trying to create something that would never let go, and instead accidentally invented something that lets go just enough to not ruin your day. Sometimes the best solutions come from embracing your failures, which is basically the sticky note philosophy applied to existence. Number 6. Moldy miracle medicine. Picture this. It's 1928, and Alexander Fleming is basically the poster child for messy lab habits. This Scottish bacteriologist went on vacation and left his bacterial culture plates sitting around like dirty dishes after a college party. When he came back, one of his Staphylococcus cultures had grown a fuzzy green coat that would make your shower curtain jealous. Most people would have thrown out the contaminated mess and started over, but Fleming was apparently the kind of person who looks at month-old leftovers and thinks, I wonder what this tastes like. Instead of tossing his moldy mistake, he noticed something weird. Wherever this green fuzz was growing, the bacteria around it had basically noped out of existence. That fuzzy intruder turned out to be penicillin mold, and it was murdering bacteria left and right. Fleming had accidentally discovered penicillin, the antibiotic that would go on to save more lives than every superhero movie combined. Your chances of surviving a simple infection before this discovery were about as good as your chances of remembering where you left your keys, which is to say, not great. The guy was trying to study bacteria, not cure humanity's bacterial woes, but sometimes the universe has other plans. Fleming's sloppy lab technique literally revolutionized medicine and turned a forgotten petri dish into one of the most important medical discoveries in human history. Basically, this man's inability to clean up after himself saved millions of lives. Take that, neat freaks! Number 5. Microwave magic. From military mishaps. In 1945, Percy Spencer was working on radar technology for Raytheon when he experienced what might be the most delicious accident in modern history. This engineer was standing next to a magnetron, basically a fancy military microwave emitter, when he reached into his pocket and discovered his chocolate bar had turned into a gooey mess. Most people would assume they'd been sitting too close to a heater, but Spencer's brain went straight to, I wonder if I can cook with this death ray. So naturally, he did what any reasonable person would do and started experimenting with food near military equipment. First, he nuked some popcorn kernels, which probably sounded like tiny explosions that made everyone think the lab was under attack. Then he tried an egg, which promptly exploded in a colleague's face, because apparently Spencer believed in learning through collective suffering. Your kitchen counter now hosts a descendant of military radar technology, and you use it primarily to reheat yesterday's regret pizza at 2 a.m. The microwave oven went from top-secret military equipment to essential college dorm survival tool faster than you can say leftover Chinese takeout. The beautiful part is that Spencer was trying to detect enemy aircraft, not revolutionize your ability to heat up frozen burritos in 30 seconds. But sometimes the universe decides that what humanity really needs isn't better warfare. It's the ability to make instant ramen at any hour of the day. Your late-night snack habits owe everything to one man's melted chocolate and questionable scientific priorities. Number 4. Sweet accidents and chemical confusion. Konstantin Fahlberg was a chemist at Johns Hopkins University in 1879. working with coal tar derivatives, which sounds about as appetizing as it actually is. After a long day of handling these lovely chemicals, he went home without washing his hands properly, because apparently personal hygiene was more of a suggestion back then. When he sat down to dinner and bit into a piece of bread, his taste buds experienced what can only be described as a flavor identity crisis. The bread tasted impossibly sweet, but not like any sweetness nature had ever produced. Most rational people would have panicked, assuming they'd been poisoned by industrial chemicals, but Fahlberg's scientific curiosity kicked in harder than your caffeine addiction on Monday morning. He rushed back to his lab and started licking everything, and I mean everything, to figure out which chemical was responsible for this bizarre sweetness. Picture a grown man systematically tasting laboratory equipment like some kind of unhinged food critic. Eventually, he traced the taste back to a compound he'd been working with, and saccharin was born. Your diet soda addiction exists because a 19th century chemist had questionable hand-washing habits and an inexplicable urge to taste random lab chemicals. Fahlberg accidentally created the first artificial sweetener, which would go on to help millions of people pretend their soda choices are healthy while still consuming enough caffeine to power a small village. The guy was trying to develop new uses for coal tar, not launch the artificial sweetener industry, but sometimes the best discoveries come from poor laboratory hygiene and questionable life choices. Number 3. Teflon and the slippery slope to success. Roy Plunkett was a young DuPont chemist in 1938, trying to create a new refrigerant gas that wouldn't kill everyone in the room, which was apparently a genuine concern back then. He stored his experimental tetrafluoroethylene gas in pressurized cylinders overnight, probably thinking he'd wake up to scientific breakthrough or spectacular failure. When morning came, he opened the cylinder expecting gas and instead found nothing, or rather, what looked like nothing until he cut the cylinder open and discovered a white, waxy substance coating the inside. Most people would have assumed their experiment had gone horribly wrong and started over, but Plunkett decided to poke this mysterious substance with the curiosity of a cat and the scientific method of a proper chemist. This accidental polymer turned out to have the most ridiculous properties imaginable. Nothing would stick to it. It could withstand temperature extremes that would melt your face off, and it was chemically inert enough to survive a nuclear apocalypse. Basically, Plunkett had accidentally created the most non-stick substance known to humanity while trying to keep refrigerators from becoming death traps. Your morning eggs slide around that Teflon pan because a refrigerant experiment went sideways in the most beneficial way possible. Plunkett was trying to revolutionize cooling systems, not make it impossible for breakfast foods to stick to cookware, but the universe had other plans. The best part? This slippery accident also became crucial for aerospace applications, helping spacecraft survive re-entry temperatures. So your scrambled eggs and space exploration both owe their success to one scientist's failed attempt at better air conditioning. Number 2. X-ray vision from glass tube experiments. Wilhelm Röntgen was messing around with cathode ray tubes in his German laboratory in 1895 because apparently Victorian scientists had nothing better to do than play with mysterious glowing tubes in dark rooms. He was investigating these strange rays that nobody understood when he noticed something that should have made him question his sanity. A fluorescent screen across the room was glowing, even though it was completely blocked from his tube. This was like discovering your TV remote works through walls, except infinitely more scientifically important and slightly less useful for avoiding human interaction. Röntgen, being the methodical scientist he was, started putting various objects between his tube and the screen to see what would happen. When he held up his hand, he nearly had a heart attack. He could see the bones inside his flesh like some kind of medical magic trick. Your annual trip to get your teeth x-rayed exists because Röntgen was curious enough to stick his hand in front of mysterious invisible rays instead of running away screaming like a sensible person. He called them X-rays because he had literally no idea what they were, which is peak scientist behavior, honestly. When you don't understand something, just slap an X on it and call it a day. The first X-ray photograph was of his wife's hand, complete with her wedding ring floating spookily around her finger bones. She reportedly looked at the image and said, "I have seen my death," which is both incredibly dramatic and probably the most appropriate response to accidentally inventing medical imaging. Röntgen was trying to understand cathode rays, not revolutionize medical diagnosis, but ended up giving doctors the ability to see inside your body without the whole messy business of cutting you open first. Number 1. Velcro and the burden of inspiration. Georges de Mestral was just trying to enjoy a nice walk with his dog in the Swiss countryside in 1941 when nature decided to ruin his day with the world's most annoying seed pods. Those pesky burrs stuck to everything. His clothes, his dog's fur, probably his patience. And most people would have spent the walk home cursing the plant kingdom for its evolutionary passive-aggressiveness. But de Mestral was either incredibly optimistic or slightly unhinged, because instead of getting annoyed, he got curious. When he finally made it home, he stuck those burrs under a microscope and discovered they were covered in tiny hooks that grabbed onto anything with loops, which explained why they were basically nature's version of that clingy friend who won't take a hint. This moment of botanical inspiration led him to spend the next 8 years developing a 2-part fastening system that mimicked those annoying seed pods. He created strips covered in tiny hooks and corresponding strips covered in tiny loops, and when pressed together, they stuck like his dog to a bacon-scented couch cushion. Your sneakers probably close with Velcro, your kid's backpack definitely does, and NASA uses it to keep things from floating around in space, all because one guy refused to accept that burrs were just a hiking inconvenience. De Mestral was trying to enjoy a peaceful nature walk, not invent a fastening system that would eventually replace shoelaces for anyone who values convenience over the illusion of being a functional adult. The real irony, he named it Velcro by combining the French words for velvet and hook, velour and crochet, which sounds way more elegant than that ripping sound that wakes up the entire household when you open your wallet at 3 a.m. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.